Okay, so the backtrack. We're trying to finish up chapter 4. And so just as a quick review, we were talking about what we've talked about so far. And we said, what is apologetics? And we were in 1 Peter 3:15, and it says, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, with gentleness and reverence. So it means to give an answer, right? So why do you believe this? And that's what we did kind of like if I was the atheist objector, and we talked about that. And then we talked about the consequences of if there is no God. So essentially, if we're wrong, then what is the alternative to that, right? And what are the consequences of that? Like, what does it mean if there is no God? And we talked about the 4 fundamental questions of life: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And we talked about how disconnected people are. We talked about the diversion pole for people who don't want to think about it. And then there's the dilemma pole with people who realize, like, hey, if there is no God, there really is no meaning in life. I can make up a meaning, but there's not really any real meaning. And there's no such thing as good, bad, right, or wrong. Evil's not really real. It might be my opinion of things I prefer. And in essence, what morality becomes is I like this or I dislike that, just like flavors of ice cream. But we talked about, like, is that really real? Like, does good really exist? Does evil really exist? So that's coming up in another chapter. And what happens when you die and all that sort of stuff. And then we started looking at these arguments. Remember, argument is like an argument in a court of law, not like, I can't stand you, get out of my face. That's not what we mean by argument. But we talked about why does anything exist at all? And that was the contingency argument. Remember that? So either something exists contingently, which means
something causes, it doesn't have to exist.
It doesn't have to exist, right? So all of us, do we exist contingently? Yes, right? Because if our parents never met, we wouldn't be here, right? And the other option is if it doesn't exist contingently, then it exists what? Necessarily, okay? And you might argue that there are some things that some people think exist necessarily, like numbers or something, right? But ultimately, what is the one necessary thing we said? God, right? And there's an argument for that, and that is everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. Either, remember, I want you to put all this in here, right? So you're like, why do you believe in God? I can give you 5 good reasons why I believe in God, right? Number 1, the contingency argument. Everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, either in
the necessity of its existence,
the necessity of its own nature, or
by something else creating
in an external cause, right? If the universe exists, if the universe, the second premise. If the universe has an explanation, that's what I need for its existence, that explanation is God. And why is that true? Because if it has an explanation, the explanation has to be God.
Because God exists necessarily, and the universe doesn't.
Right. So, or the other option is the universe exists necessarily, right? That's the only other way out of it, right? That the universe is just fixed. Right? And then the third premise is
the universe does not exist necessarily.
The universe exists. Right? So if the universe exists, therefore it has an explanation of its cause. If it's not, it doesn't exist necessarily, and that cause is some uncaused contingent cause, which is God, right? And now we got to the Kalam cosmological argument, which says
whatever begins to exist as a cause.
Whatever begins to exist as a cause.
The universe began to
exist. The universe began to exist. Therefore, it has a cause, right? All right. Right on. All right. So now we've talked about this for the last few weeks, and we've gone through all the different reasons. Remember, we have two reasons to think that the universe began to exist. What were the two? And there's two different videos I showed you. So what are the two
I
reasons?
know one of them is that it's expanded, which means you can take it all the way down.
Okay, so but if we put that into a general category, we would say that would be
Scientific.
scientific. So we have scientific reasons to think that the universe began to exist, right? One of them is the expansion of the universe. So if the universe is expanding, then by definition, we should be able to rewind it. And if we rewound everything, we go back to nothing, essentially, right? They go back to what they call quark time, which is the earliest measure that they can kind of, because before that, everything breaks down and no one really knows, right? And so that's the earliest they go back to. But essentially, it just came into being. That's the Big Bang theory, right? Now, there are some other scientific reasons to think that that's true. You remember what else they said?
The second law of thermodynamics.
Right,
that
which
it exists. If the universe had existed forever, we would be in what was it called? They called it like
something soup.
yeah, the something soup. I forget what they called it, but
Well, everything would be
basically everything would be neutral. Like there wouldn't be
Everything
energy.
right. Because what's the second law of thermodynamics?
That everything, all heat or energy tends to become more disordered.
Right, it tends to dissipate, right?
Yeah.
And remember the example that I gave? It's like if you had a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
If I sit the cup of coffee on this table, what will happen to it?
It'll sit on the table.
Yeah, but
It'll get cold.
it will go to room temperature, right? So the heat will dissipate. And so it's the same thing with cold beverage, right? It will warm up. And so that's what essentially will happen in the universe. All the usable energy will dissipate. And so if the universe has existed forever, then the argument was that essentially our sun, bless you, would have run out of energy by now, right? But here it is, and we know the ages of stars, not really, but we know the lifespan of stars, and we know that our star is not that old, right? So it's like, well, how do you explain that? Because if we've been here forever, it shouldn't look like that, right? So there's scientific evidence, and remember that there's those three guys, Gord, Borg, Guth, and Vilenkin, that's her name, who said that any universe that is expanding cannot be past time infinite, right? So it has to have a beginning. That's what they said. Okay, so that's the scientific stuff. There's another one. I almost said it. Philosophical. What was the philosophical argument that the universe began to
That
exist?
was the one with like the infinite hotel, right?
Right.
That an infinite number of things can't actually exist. Like an infinite number of things, like an infinite number of time can't actually exist, because if you can go back in time, you can continually go back until you find it beginning.
But there would be
No beginning.
no beginning because it's infinite, right? So the question is, if there's been an infinite amount of time before today, how did we get to today? Right? Because when did you start? It's like trying to count from 0 to infinity. Can you ever count from 0 to infinity?
No.
No, because you can always add one more, right?
Infinity.
So you can't count down from that, because where do you start? You could go back one more, go back one more, go back one more. Okay, so with that as a refresher, now let's look at our friend here, who's going to,
Not our friend is an overstatement.
well, we should try to be nice to everybody. You don't have to agree with all the arguments. So, all right, here we go.
Does God exist?
Did you guys get a chance to think about this? Because I'm going to rely on you here.
Material universe, all that is, or ever was, or ever will be.
Are those the only two options?
One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument.
But unfortunately, it's not a very good one. Admittedly, there's no shortage of videos about
The Kalam cosmological argument.
The Kalam cosmological argument.
The Kalam argument, Kalam
the
cosmological argument.
cosmological argument.
Come on, man.
Oh, I saw some light appear. 3, 2.
And the reason why it doesn't work as intended. But it seems nearly every day a Christian brings it up to me in comments or social media or even in person. And in the famous words of Inigo Montoya.
I don't think it is. What do you think it is?
Since my viewers have asked me to cover more William Lane Craig, and he's the man responsible for its current popularity, let's take a look at the version from Craig's Reasonable Faith Ministry.
It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
The first thing worth noting is that this is the entire argument, and yet the word God appears nowhere. For the sake of discussion, I could accept the entire thing as is, and all we would have to agree to is that there was a sufficient cause for the universe. To make the leap that this causes a deity is entirely outside of the scope of the cosmological argument, and does not follow from the premises. Let's say someone emerged from a crowd to lay claim to the throne based on their royal lineage.
Prove that you are the son of the king.
Every human who was born has parents.
This is true.
I was born.
Also true.
Therefore, I have parents.
But that doesn't mean your father was the king.
Nonsense. Hand me the crown.
So even if the Kalam succeeds, it ultimately fails. But still, let's let Craig take it close.
So, any problems with that?
I mean, sorry, go ahead. Anything that is a quote-unquote sufficient cause for the universe would have to be essentially God. Like, it has all the attributes that God has.
Yeah, you don't have to put the name God on it, but it has to be what God is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the video wasn't. The video was more or less just trying to prove the cosmological argument itself. Just saying, okay, if we agree on the cosmological argument, because I think there was a second video that then goes on to talk about how God is the cause. I think this video that he's reviewing is just talking about how the cosmological argument is true and how it relates to God. But he's kind of just saying, oh, he never said the word God once, therefore it isn't about God type of thing, which is just wrong.
Well, in the original video, remember at the end of it, they said, so if the universe couldn't cause itself, then whatever caused it must be, and then they give those attributes like you're saying, right? Because the argument is that if we define the universe as all space, time, matter, and energy, when he's going to talk about that too in a second. But if that's what we define the universe as, then whatever began the universe, whatever caused it to begin, must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal. Remember, we talked about the argument for why there has to be a personal cause, right? Something had to decide to do it, right? And immensely powerful. And we said that, what else is there that's timeless, spaceless, personal, immaterial, immensely powerful? Like that sounds like what we define as God. So that's the whole point of the argument. If you said God in the argument, then they would accuse you of arguing in a circle, right? You're putting God you're already like saying it's God before you even make the case. So they're just saying, if that's true, then we know what attributes the cause must be or must have, and therefore what matches something that has those attributes. There's only one thing, God, right? So any other comments about that? Everybody follow what I was kind of getting at there?
So look.
Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician.
Did Craig just admit that a good analogy for God would be a magician? Interesting.
Did he?
No.
No, he didn't.
No.
What was his point?
His point was that it's impossible.
It's more plausible than something that come out of existence with something else that out of nothing.
Right.
Yeah, he's basically just like making a red herring. He's like just trying to bring up this random argument for no reason. Like that he's making an analogy, but this guy's thinking of it as like an accusation, even though, or like comparing it to this, even though it's wrong. He's just trying to bring up some random point that doesn't really make sense in this case.
Right. He's saying essentially that, well, because the point that Craig's making is that you can't get something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And even if you want things to pop into existence like a magic show, we know that the magician's doing it. We know that it's not really popping into existence, right? There's some kind of trick there to make it happen, right? But it is saying, his point is saying that for the people who think that it just happened, like that's silly, because it's even crazier than believing that the rabbit just came out of the hat. So he's not comparing it to God being a magician, right?
Statement. If we're going to evaluate the truth of the first premise, we may first consider defining terms. What does it mean to begin to exist? For example, when does a chair begin to exist? Is it when
And this is where you have to be careful, because this is what tends to happen. Let's redefine the terms, right? And usually in the redefinition of the terms, there's some kind of shift that just happened. You're like, wait, so watch what he says here.
the plans are drawn up, when the wood is cut, when the pieces are assembled, the first time someone sits on it? In fact, perhaps we'd be better off reworking the entire argument. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist is a rearrangement of things that already exist. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, the universe is a rearrangement of things that already exist. That's it.
He's saying that the universe is a rearrangement of things that already exist, and who made those things, or how did they come to exist?
Essentially, what he's arguing for is an eternal universe,
Yeah.
which science has proven that an eternal universe can't exist.
Right.
So the entire argument falls apart because the universe can't be eternal, so therefore the universe can't be just be a arrangement. It had to be created at some point.
And that's also his definition of when it started, when he was naming all the things of like, when did the chair become the chair? He chose the one that when the chair was an arrangement of all the things. Like when he was defining when the chair actually became a chair, that was only one of the things that he stated.
Yeah, and I mean, like the chair. The chair is like very different from the universe. Like the chair has, I mean, obviously the chair has a creator. So like even that, like it has a cause. So that goes back to the whole, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The chair had a cause, and it began to exist because it had a cause.
Okay, so you're kind of, I wasn't going to go here right away, but you're onto something. Remember when I talked about causes? I said there's two types of causes. Remember what the two types of causes are? So like this book, right? There's two causes of the book. One is the material cause of the book, right? So there's actually the stuff that the book is made out of, right? So it's made out of paper and ink, and you can break that down into whatever chemical particles and stuff like that, right? So but does that explain the book?
No, there's also like words on it and stuff.
Right. So that means that tells us that there's an intelligence that put these marks in a certain order using certain symbols to get information. So the other type of cause is, do you remember, Josiah? It's not a material cause. It's called efficient cause, right? So like in this case, the efficient cause of the book is the person who wrote the book. Right? If I had a statue, the material cause of the statue would be the marble or whatever it's made of. But the efficient cause would be the sculptor who sculpted it, right? So when you look at the universe, there's the material cause, which is the stuff that the universe is made of, or whatever made that stuff. And then there's the efficient cause, which is it's like saying, John Lennox, who I'm going to show you a video in a couple minutes, talks about this in science. He says that like in science, they try to say that science can explain everything, we don't need God. And he said that's like trying to explain a Model T using science, right? You can go through and explain how everything in the Model T works. But you still need Henry Ford, right? Because Henry Ford's the one who designed the whole thing and put it together, right? So just explaining how the stuff works doesn't explain how you got the Model T there. Right, you had to have somebody like it just didn't happen, right? Henry Ford is the efficient cause. Okay, now, so you're right on that, but there's another thing here too, and I think you were hitting on this, Ian. He talked about the chair beginning to exist when it was arranged in a certain way, but in this case, he's essentially saying that the universe never began to exist. Isn't he? Because you just said he's arguing for an eternal universe. So if we say like the chair is really just an arrangement of the particles, then did the chair ever really begin to exist? That's his argument, isn't it? He's saying that the chair never really began to exist. So if the chair never really began to exist, does the chair actually exist? You see what I'm saying? That sounds silly, right? Like, yeah, of course the chair exists, right? So there's actually let me see how far it is here.
How does it go on? And brings us to the conclusion that our universe came not from nothing, but from something pre-existing, which we'll get to later. As for
all right, so I want to hit this. There's actually you can impress your friends if they're impressed by that sort of thing. There's a term called mereological nihilism. Mine aren't either. They're just like, oh, here he goes. All right, fine. Will you please stop? But he talks about this in this video. And go. 1, 2, 3, go.
Oh, it paused.
Slow readers.
Watching it at 50% speed.
Consider now then objections to the second premise that the universe began to exist. Objection number 6, nothing ever begins to exist, for the material of which a thing consists precedes it. So it is not true that the universe began to exist. Response to number 6. I think this is my favorite bad objection, since the assertion that nothing ever begins to exist is so patently ridiculous. Did I exist before I was conceived? If so, where was I? What was I doing during the Jurassic period? Has the World Trade Center always existed? If so, why did the Native American Indians notice it? This objection obviously confuses a thing with the matter or stuff of which the thing is made. Just because the stuff of which something was made has always existed doesn't imply that the thing itself has always existed. Now, since writing this talk, it has occurred to me that the objector could save himself from the embarrassment of affirming that he has always existed by adopting what's called mereological nihilism, which is the view that there are no composite objects. That is to say, all that exists are just fundamental particles which are arranged in various ways. So in fact, there really are no chairs or tables or horses or people or palm trees. There are just fundamental particles which are arranged chair-wise or table-wise or people-wise. And so in denying that he ever began to exist, the objector isn't affirming that he's always existed. Rather, what he's denying is that he ever does exist. So in this case, the cure is really worse than the disease, because now instead of saying he has always existed, what the objector has to say is that he doesn't exist. The objector literally does not exist. Now, if that's the case, then it might make us wonder why we should bother responding to him if he doesn't exist. What this implies is, in fact, nobody, literally nobody, has ever raised this objection because there aren't any people. But this is surely absurd. Am I to affirm that I do not exist? It reminds me of the undergraduate student who had been reading Descartes and burst into his professor's office early one morning, bleary-eyed and unshaven. Obviously, he had been up all night. He was very distraught, and he said, "Professor, tell me, do I exist?" And the professor looked at him and said, "Who wants to know?" The idea that one does not exist is surely metaphysically absurd. So that it seems to me that this is simply to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. Well, the serious point of this muddled objection, I think, is its presupposition that everything that begins has a material cause. But that claim is irrelevant to the truth of the two premises of the Kalam cosmological argument, and it would require proof in any case. Now, it is true, I think, that in our experience, material things do not begin to exist without material causes. So we do have the same sort of inductive evidence on behalf of material causation as we have for efficient causation. But if we have good arguments and evidence that the material realm had an absolute beginning preceded by nothing, this can override the inductive evidence. What we cannot reasonably say, I think, is that the universe sprang into being without either an efficient or a material cause, since being does not come from non-being. But there's no sort of metaphysical absurdity involved in something's having an efficient cause, but no material cause.
I believe it was objection number 6, talking about the things don't actually come into existence.
Yes.
And you had given the possibility of neurological nihilism. But is that really even, according to what you gave by Plato, is that even possible? Because it speaks of changing and alteration as well, needing a cause. And so even if it's just an arrangement of particles, those particles still change to different arrangements. And so yes, would they have to avoid it, would they have to devolve all the way to a sort of pantheism where there actually is no distinction in any kind of entity?
Well, this is a very good question. And I was ad-libbing at that point in my lecture this evening, and I had intended to say a further comment, but I neglected because I didn't have notes. And that is, we can actually reformulate or rephrase the Kalam argument to meet the scruples of the mereological nihilist. And it would go like this. If fundamental particles arranged universe-wise begin to exist, they have a cause. Premise 2, the fundamental particles arranged universe-wise began to exist. 3, therefore, the fundamental particles arranged universe-wise have a cause. So you can simply reformulate the argument to meet the demands of the mereological nihilist, whose view in any case I think is absolutely bad.
All right. So did you follow all that? So essentially, that's what this guy's doing right now. So now he threw that one out. This is like they just throw this stuff out. It's kind of like a shotgun approach, see what sticks, right? So they throw that one out. So again, I think we're okay with that, right?
Huh. For a cause, well, in order for a cause and effect to have relevance, it's clear that one would need to have time as well. Cause must come temporally before effect. If we try to extend this premise, is that true?
No. Well, in our universe, yeah. Inside of time, yeah. But once you get outside of time, then you're outside of time. So the cause effect temporal relationship doesn't apply if you're outside of time, right? Well, I mean, like,
what do we say? If God existed timelessly and then brought the universe into existence,
time began to exist at the same instant.
Simultaneously, right? So you could have simultaneous causation, right? So when he did it, that's when time began. So is his objection a problem if that's true? No, it doesn't follow that the cause had to temporally precede the effect, have to come before it in time. That's not necessary. It can happen simultaneously with it. Right?
Beyond time as we know it, then we'd be in a realm where there might not be causation as we know it. Outside the scope of our universe, we can't know if this premise holds.
But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin? Or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever.
Again, it's important to understand terms. In this case, the difference between universe and cosmos, as they are used in science, since that's where the discussion will be going. The cosmos, as the late great Carl Sagan put it,
The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be.
whereas the universe is best defined as the single instantiation of space-time where we live. The universe is part of the cosmos, like a storage unit is part of a storage facility.
Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. It doesn't really matter what he says for the rest of the video. You can just replace the universe with cosmos. And what he does for the rest of the video is just deflect on the basis that he's talking about the universe, not the cosmos.
So
he's throwing out all the arguments because he says the universe, but he's not addressing it as if he had said cosmos.
Right. So did Craig, well, first of all, do we have any evidence that there's anything beyond the universe?
No,
No. Could we get any evidence?
probably not.
Probably not. No. Remember, our galaxy is 100,000 light years in diameter, and it's one of billions of galaxies. So, like, you couldn't even get out of the galaxy if you traveled.
100,000 light years in diameter.
If you travel for 100,000 years at the speed of light, that's how long it takes you to get from one end of the galaxy to the other. That's just the Milky Way, right? So, like, how are we going to get out of the universe? Like, you can't, right? So that's one thing. But is it so? Like, before I go ahead.
Also, if he said that the universe is inside of the cosmos, then what made the cosmos?
Right.
Just,
So
what he was saying, just switch it out.
Right. So does Craig? And he said, well, let me just play this a little bit more here.
And we have no way of knowing if we are merely one among many universes, or one in a succession of universes, or maybe the only universe. What's important is that modern cosmologists don't say that the universe has been here forever and is just there and that's all, as Craig asserts. That's how they would describe the cosmos. In science, cosmos and universe are not interchangeable terms. Craig's video goes on to appeal to science's acceptance of the Big Bang Theory to establish that the universe had a beginning. As long as Craig sticks to the scientific definition of universe and doesn't pretend that it's the same as the cosmos, we can skip that part and all just agree.
Oh, well, he just skipped a really big part.
Yes.
He
Right.
literally just skipped a huge part. So basically,
Exactly.
he's giving Craig a point.
That's what I wanted you guys to see if you noticed. Where he says,
Craig sticks to the scientific definition of universe and doesn't pretend that it's the same as the cosmos, we can skip that part and all just agree. Oh, wait.
It goes so fast I can't get it.
Thermodynamics.
You know what it said right there? It said the same thing would apply to the multiverse if there is such a thing. So all the arguments that he's using, like you just said, apply to if there is such a thing as a multiverse. It all works for the same, like it's the same thing. So you can't get out of it just by appealing to the cosmos, because the cosmos also would have to have a definite beginning, right? And that's why all those different universe models that they were showing, they're trying to come up with some way to explain how there could be an eternal universe, because again, that's the problem with the Big Bang. The bang, right? There was nothing else. Like the Big Bang points to a definite, like there was nothing before that, and now there's something. And if you have a bang, you need a banger, right? There needs to be something to do it, right? So they're trying to figure out a way to get past that, but all the science is pointing to.
Yeah, the other thing is like when he was talking about how he said that the universe is all that is or ever was, and he said that's what scientists call the cosmos. Like changing the name of it doesn't change the fact that it needs an explanation.
Right. I'm gonna keep going a lot. I can kind of hear upstairs, so as long as I keep hearing upstairs talking, keep going.
It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy.
We don't want to talk about the first law of thermodynamics, so it's good that Craig affirms the second law. Carry on.
It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause.
Right. The argument concludes that the universe has a sufficient cause. Still no discussion of God, and the video is almost over.
And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe.
So far, so good.
It must be spaceless.
Whoa, we went over the rails right on the first one. Craig himself described our universe as the space-time universe. The Big Bang was the start of our universe's local space coordinates, x, y, and z, t, and time, t. But just as a piece of graph paper has its own localized x, y spatial coordinate system, that piece of paper still exists in the universe's.
See, so what's he doing there?
He's deflecting again to the whole cosmos thing.
Well,
he's assuming that there's stuff beyond what we can prove and there's any evidence for it.
Right. And so again, if if it all applies even to the multiverse, then there's no other thing to appeal to, right? Which again, all the evidence points to that. And
he also, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
He also, what was it? He keeps saying how the video doesn't talk about God, but like you said before, the video isn't talking about God. It's basically just saying that Craig's video is just saying how the cosmological argument is right and it's true and it makes sense. This video isn't supposed to, it's supposed to point towards God, but it's not going to directly say it because they knew that that would be, everyone's going to jump over and be like, whoa, you're assuming way too many things and things like that.
Right. And remember, the whole point of this is, like, people will say, well, it's God of the gaps, right? Anytime you can't explain something, you're like, well, God did it. It must be God, right? But what he's doing in these arguments is saying that there is good scientific evidence and philosophical evidence to support the premises of a deductive argument that lead to a conclusion. So we're not starting with God at the beginning of the argument. We're starting with what we can see, right? Like Romans 1, that what we can know about God is evident from what he created. And so we're here, right? There's stuff, like you're here, I'm here, the universe is here. How did it get here, right? And we argue back and we say, okay, whatever begins to exist as a cause, did the universe begin to exist, therefore as a cause. And so the conclusion, like you said, leads us to this must be some spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal cause of all this stuff. So you wouldn't want to put God in the argument because that would, it's leading you to the conclusion of these are the attributes of whatever the cause was, and these are the same attributes that God has revealed that he has in his word, right? So that makes sense, right?
The other thing is that he said, this is kind of just like a little additional thing, but like he says the cause is beyond the space-time universe, and this guy was like, okay, great, fine. But then as soon as he says it's spaceless or timeless, he has a problem. But if it's beyond the space-time universe, it necessarily has to be spaceless and timeless.
Right, because there was no space.
Right.
Yeah.
Three-dimensional space. The cosmos may well have its own spatial dimensions. It may have many more dimensions than our four, or perhaps it could have even 0 dimensions. The point is, there could be any number of sufficient causes for our universe that exist in some semblance of space outside of our version of it. The cause needn't be spaceless.
Timeless?
What applied to the 3 dimensions of space equally applies to the 4th dimension of time. A stopwatch has its own temporal system, but the one pressing the start button still exists in their own temporal system. The cosmos may have its own system of time, or it may exist in such a state that the idea of time is incoherent. We don't yet know what the sufficient cause of the universe was, but it could easily have been temporal.
Now, would the argument from the impossibility of an infinite time still work, even if there was a cosmos outside of the universe?
Yeah.
Yes. So the argument for the second argument of the video we showed would still hold, right? That you still have the problem of how did we get to today? If there's an actual infinite of time before today, how did we get here?
And you can't take something that's not timeless and make it timeless. You can't just like do some stuff and then it's timeless all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, what he's doing is he's essentially like postulating what's called a hypertime. So like you have like time at this level, and then you're saying, okay, but then there's a hypertime up here, T2, T1, but then there's a hypertime up here, T3. Okay, that doesn't solve the problem though, right? Because you still have time, right? So even if you want to say like, well, we measure time by the Earth's rotation around the sun, and other people like, okay, there's still change, so there's still time. So however you want to measure it, doesn't say that there's no more time.
Material.
This is getting repetitive, but there's no reason to assert that the cause couldn't have been a material manifestation. Sign?
Why couldn't it have been?
Same reason time thing.
Well, but matter
Matter began to exist.
and you can't have matter without
Time.
Well, yeah, true. If matter began to exist, you would need time, right? Space, right? Because this occupies space, right?
I just don't think that the Big Bang was from nothing, but rather the expansion of a singularity containing all of our universe's matter and energy. Whatever was happening inside that singularity would certainly have been material as we know it. Earlier, Craig appealed to the second law of thermodynamics.
All right. So,
You can't.
are they still talking? Maybe we should stop there. Go ahead.
He's appealing to this quote unquote singularity, but a singularity isn't a sufficient cause.
Well,
Because-
all the singularity is that's all the further back that they can calculate.
Right, but he's saying the singularity was material, and so he's saying that the singularity was the sufficient cause for the universe, essentially is what he's saying.
Right.
Because he's arguing that the cause for the universe doesn't necessarily have to be immaterial because the singularity had material in it. So he's saying the singularity was the cause for the universe, which
But so
does
that,
make sense.
but then you're saying the singularity there is therefore eternal.
Right.
You get the
Which
singularity.
again, you have the same problem. Like,
Right.
was the singularity always there? No. Right. So I want to kind of take that piece apart. So we're going to run out of time. So any comments online? So hopefully we can wrap this up next time, and then we'll get to. Sorry, this has been some.
Why does he make himself so buff?
Yeah.
I know. I
That's
just
so
realized.
dumb.
If you're gonna make a cartoon of yourself, you might as well make yourself.
He
look
looks
good.
so jacked.
So the next.
He
so
looks like
the
he
next-
actually has
His
muscle.
other arm though. It's even better.
For the next class, if you could read the chapter 5, which is about the fine-tuning argument.
What?
So it's if you're not a science person, I apologize. This is kind of the last of the science stuff.
Do we
For
get to
now.
watch the video for the fine-tuning argument?
Yeah, and then after that we get to the moral argument, which is my personal favorite, because I feel like that's the one that's most practical to use with people. Because most people, when you're not going to walk up to them and start talking about
Space,
fine,
time,
you know, like,
vortex.
do you know why the gravitational constant is what it is?
Have you been considered
I have
the
no
second
idea.
law of thermodynamics?
Believe in
Yeah.
biological nails.
So anyway, all right.
About what happens when you die.
But very, very good. You guys did a great job on that. That was rather complicated stuff. So I'm very impressed with you guys. Very, very impressed.
One thing that I think is really interesting is when he's done with this whole video, I want a list of what we believe. We believe that the universe existed and it began to exist because of God, right? Like basically what we're boiling down to is God exists. What he's going to believe at the end of this video is that there's a multiverse, or like, what is it, cosmos with tons of different universes and tons of different time things and different dimensions and whatever. Like what he believes sounds to someone who had never heard of anything ever before, right? If you explained it to both of them, God would sound a lot more reasonable just from like reason.
His belief sounds like Into the Spider-Verse all over again.
And ultimately, like if you ask like why, what's he's already said it, so it's not spoiler or anything, but his answer is we don't know. That's it. We don't know. We don't
What's
know.
more plausible? What are the gaps that we don't know?
Well, it's what it turns into is science of the gaps, right? Science someday will find the answer, but until then, we know that it wasn't God.
Yeah, we need to count how many times he said, "Oh, we don't know," or "We might know," because he said, "Oh, there might be multiverse." He didn't give any evidence, so he's basing most of his stuff
Earlier
on.
he said something like that as well, where he just goes in the middle of the video, he's like, which we haven't yet discovered, or something.
Right.
Like that.
And remember, I think this is a good point to end on. Like we said when we talked about the stuff, like the first or second chapter. Essentially, we're looking for what is most probably true, right? I mean, again, I can't even prove that Nathan exists, like with 100% certainty.
It's hallucination.
You know, I can't prove that I ate breakfast this morning with 100% certainty,
Yes,
or that I had my 7th birthday. Like, you know, like, remember we talked about all this stuff? Like, there's no way for me to prove. Like, how do I know we weren't just created 5 minutes ago with the built-in appearance of age, or that I'm not just a brain in a vat of chemicals and you're part of some hallucination in my mind? But no one holds those beliefs, right? Because, like we said, like, I'm rationally justified to believe what my senses are telling me, right? Unless I have a defeater, some overwhelming reason to not believe that you're real. Like, there's no good reason for that. So, but we're dealing with probabilities. So, you know, can I present a 100% certain that no one could ever object to argument? Like, certainly not, because again, like, I can't even prove that 8 o'clock this morning existed. But that's the kind of level of proof that a lot of times you, like these guys who make these videos, want. And I don't know if I showed you the one about the guy who said, like, he was trying to explain everything away in the Bible as a hallucination, like they hallucinated when they saw Jesus.
Oh no, you
Right?
just.
Did I show you that one? Maybe I'll show you that one next time.
Oh, that's
But at the end of the debate, it was Craig was debating this guy, and at the end of the debate, Craig was like, "Well, what kind of evidence would convince you?" He's like, "Is there any evidence that would convince you that this is true?" He's like, "You know what I would need?" He's like, "I would need an angel or God to come down here and be like,
Yeah,
or Jesus to come and like, here
That
I
would be a
am."
hallucination.
Right? Craig was like, "You'd think that was a hallucination. You wouldn't believe it anyway." Right? So
What did the guy say to that?
he just is like, "Well, touche, you got me." Like, you're
Ooh.
probably right.
You're probably.
All right, let's just close with prayer, and then Lord, we just again thank you for this time that we can think about these things. We thank you for the ability to think about them, that you've given us minds, and we pray that, like your word says, that we would love you with all of our mind, and as well as with our heart and soul and strength. We just pray you would help us to continue to look into these things. We thank you that you have given us your word, that you've revealed yourself to us, especially in the person of the Lord Jesus, that we know that you love us because of what he demonstrated for us on the cross. And we pray that you would help us to be able to defend the truth of your word to the people who we come in contact with, so we might show them your love and tell them about your offer of salvation through the finished work of Jesus. So we pray that this would be the case, and we pray you bless the rest of our day today. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.